I was watching TV while simultaneously flipping through a book on skinhead culture. A cup of herbal tea sat on the coffee table to my right, and my backpack with all my belongings rested beside me on the couch to my left. I had the remote for the TV laying on my book, the off switch just inches from my finger, and the television's volume was low enough that it couldn't be heard from the hallway of this apartment building. The backpack was packed, zipped, and turned so the straps were facing my body. Everything was ready for me to exit the apartment at a moment's notice, leaving no trace behind. Everything except for the tea. The tea was still too hot to drink. This was Jody's apartment. Jody's tea, Jody's book. Jody had left for class an hour earlier, and she wouldn't be back until late that evening. But her roommate, Melissa, I didn't know her schedule. She could walk in the door at any moment. I turned off the TV, placed the book on a bookshelf, and carried my backpack into the kitchen. It was February in Boston. Steam heat hissed through radiators along the floorboards. Snow blew off a neighbor's roof and gently caressed the window above Jody's kitchen sink. I grabbed a bowl from a cabinet and made my way into the pantry. There were 3 different types of cereal, so I combined them all, hoping that, by using a smaller amount of each one, this would lessen the chance of someone noticing that any cereal had been removed at all. I placed the cereal boxes back in the pantry exactly as I had found them, the labels facing precisely the same direction they faced before. The cardboard top to one box was wide open when I removed it from the shelf, so I made sure to leave it that same way. I poured a minimal amount of milk on my cereal and sat down at the kitchen table eating. When I was done, I washed the bowl and spoon, dried them with a paper towel, and put them back in the cabinet from which I'd found them. I slept with Jody the night before, in her bed, as I did every other Tuesday. Jody and I were on a 2-week schedule, although she did not know this. I found that 2 weeks was just enough time for people to forget that you had been there before, or better yet, for people to be excited to see you again. Jody and I slept together, but we didn't have sex, or make out, or even kiss. We slept together in the literal sense, both asleep right next to each other in her bed. I scanned the refrigerator for something else to eat, but it was mostly empty. There was a terrific breakfast spot just 2 blocks away. On more than one occasion, Jody and I had gone there and ordered a short stack of pancakes, just because we like saying the word short stack. But now there was a dilemma. I did not have a key to Jody's apartment. If I left, there was no coming back. I was out for the day, out in the 30-degree weather. I drank a cup of water to put something else in my stomach, then returned to the living room and looked through a stack of DVDs that sat next to Jody's television. I picked out a drama, put it on, and lay down on the couch with my backpack resting on my stomach. I had been couch surfing for 5 months. This might seem like a hard way to survive, but I was in heaven. I was 22 years old and obsessed with living, compulsively so. I had to go to everything I heard about. Every art show, house party, poetry reading, club night, every concert and festival, every social gathering of any kind. I carried a notebook in my backpack where I kept a list of these events. My goal was to attend 2 social events every weekday and 4 events Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. A minimum of 20 social events per week. But that wasn't enough because there were dinner parties as well, and movie nights, and just smaller social gatherings. Plus, I was attending college, which took up a fair amount of my time. But the greatest impediment to a full-time social life was sleep. The summer before my senior year of college, I made a choice. I would not get a room in the dorms or share an apartment with friends. I would stay in a new location every night, and in this way, I would never not be doing something. What I didn't take into account was the great benefit of solitude. When the movie was done, I ejected the DVD and put it back in its case. I returned to the pantry and scooped a few handfuls of each of the 3 cereals directly into my mouth. A deck of playing cards lay on the kitchen table, so I played 3 games of solitaire. "Do you want to play Sergeant Major?" asked Jody the night before, holding the same deck of cards. "Yeah," I said enthusiastically. "I'd love to." Jody dealt cards to Melissa and I as we drank wine at the kitchen table. We had just finished a dinner of pasta with tomatoes and pesto sauce, our dirty bowls soaked in the sink. I stared at my 16 cards and arranged them as one would a hand of poker. "What do I do now?" I asked. "I thought you'd played this before," said Jody. "I've never even heard of this game," I said. Enthusiasm goes a long way. This is one of the first lessons I learned in long-term couch surfing. People become nervous when they have house guests. They are unsure of their ability to host. And the best way to ease them of this anxiety is to say yes to everything. "I have this movie. Do you want to watch it?" "Yes." "I'm not sure if it's any good." "It looks good to me." "Do you like eggplant? I can cook that tonight." "Yes, I love eggplant." "The people across the hall are having this lame board game night." "Hey, let's go." "I bought paint to redo the bathroom a couple of months ago, but I'm being lazy." "Do you have a roller?" "No, I have a brush." Let's paint this bathroom. After we had successfully gotten through a game of Sergeant Major, I wandered over to the sink and began doing the dishes. "You don't have to do that," said Jody, but I waved her off. A few pieces of pasta remained in a strainer, so I ate them before giving the strainer a scrub. It hadn't occurred to me that maybe I should save this little bit of pasta so I have something to eat the next day. Doing the dishes is a great way to get invited back to someone's apartment. There are many ways to chip in for your stay, but cleaning dishes is the most universally effective. If you find yourself in a house full of roommates with a serious dirty dish pileup, you will be considered a hero if you tackle those dishes. It will alleviate tension amongst these roommates, and you will forever be welcome in that home. I was back on the couch, zoning out, when Jody's roommate Melissa walked through the door carrying her school books. "Hey, Fletcher," she said, throwing the books on the coffee table. Is Jody around?" I looked to my left and to my right, as if I too was trying to figure out where Jody was. "She went to class," I said. I didn't mention that the class had started over 4 hours ago. Melissa walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. I looked at my backpack. It was resting on the kitchen table next to the deck of cards. "We are all out of food," said Melissa. She closed the refrigerator door, walked to the pantry, and picked up the box of cereal with the unclosed top. "What are you doing?" asked Melissa, shoveling cereal into her mouth. Before I had a chance to answer, Melissa continued. "I'm going to get some Chinese food delivered," she said. "If I got some sesame tofu, would you eat some?" She carried the cereal into the living room and lifted something off the top of the book she had just set down. "My friend just lent me season 2 of Dawson's Creek," she said, holding up a DVD. "Let's eat Chinese food and watch this whole thing. It's so fucking cold out." I rose from the couch, walked into the kitchen, and grabbed my backpack off the kitchen table. "Sorry," I said, making my way towards the door. "I'm actually late meeting up with someone. I gotta run." "Okay," said Melissa, sitting down on the couch. "See you later." The door locked behind me as I stepped into the hall. It was 3 p.m. I didn't have class until 5. I unlocked my bicycle from a pole in front of Jody's apartment and began pedaling towards a cheap burrito place where a few of my friends worked. I could kill an hour over there. In my 5 months of couch surfing, I'd learned to never stay 2 nights in a row, never become a fixture in my friends' apartments. Always leave them wanting more, you could say. In any case, I had to get over to Mass Art after class. They were having a book fair. Eventually, I would crash at my friend Justin's house, where I stayed every other Wednesday. But before that, I had a job to do. I had to find one more social event before the night was through. In the beginning, I crashed here and there, sometimes staying at one house for a number of days before moving to another. It was the start of the school year, and everyone was particularly social. They were just happy to be around their classmates again. My friend Simone's apartment became my headquarters because everything about it was perfect. Simone and I got along great. She always had weed. Her apartment was right on Newberry Street, where I loitered during the day. And a closet next to her bathroom held the one thing that most of my friends couldn't provide: a washer and dryer. "Did you see what Dennis did last night?" asked Simone as she shut her apartment door behind me. She stared at me for a moment, and when I didn't respond, she went on. "He lost his keys, so he decided to punch right through the front door of the building." "Oh," I said. "Yeah, I saw the plywood they put in." "That's an 8-foot glass door," Simone pointed out. "Do you know how much that costs?" Simone sat down on the couch, picked up the remote, and began flipping through the TV stations. "We'll be lucky if we don't get evicted," she said. I poured a cup of water from the sink and joined Simone on the couch. My backpack was stuffed with dirty clothing, but I wouldn't wash it until later. I didn't want to seem too obvious. "It's not like he even got into the apartment," Simone said. "Like, just because you punched through the outside door doesn't mean you have your keys now." Simone pointed at the door through which I'd just entered. "He tried to kick through the actual apartment door," she said, "but it was too strong, thank God." I looked at Simone's face as she stared at the television. Her hair was bleach blonde, and she proudly wore too much makeup. Her foundation was an inhuman shade of white. "I gotta find a new roommate," Simone said. "Dennis is driving me nuts." It's true that Dennis was a nightmare. He was in his 30s, 10 years older than us, but he behaved like an attention-starved 5th grader. This was compounded by his size, which was massive. He loved to scream inappropriate things, pick up objects that were not to be handled, and push people's buttons if he found a button to push. But at the same time, he somehow paid rent on this expensive Newberry apartment. It was his weed that I was always smoking, and most importantly, it didn't seem to faze him that I was on his couch all of the time. Simone and I were pretty deep into some reality TV show when Dennis came through the door. "I found my keys," Dennis exclaimed. "I left them up some girl's ass." "What's wrong with you?" shouted Simone. "I've been avoiding calls from the landlord all day. You have to call him." But Dennis wasn't listening. The sheer volume of Simone's voice just got him revved up. "This door is so strong," said Dennis, talking over Simone. "I could not kick it in last night." Dennis leaned close to the door and studied the dual locks. He took a few steps back, gave the door a long stare, then lunged forward and kicked it with all of his might. The apartment shook. "What are you doing?" screamed Simone. She jumped to her feet. "I couldn't kick it in from the outside," said Dennis, walking to the center of the room. "But I bet I can break those locks coming at it from the inside." He got a running start and again smashed the center of the door with his foot. The walls rattled, a number of items fell off the kitchen counter, but the door held strong. It only took me a month of couch surfing to develop my 14-day system. By that point, I knew my friends' apartments well. Who had a couch with blankets, who had contact lens solution I could use, who stayed up too late, who went to bed too early. My bi-weekly schedule was all laid out in my notebook. I had it written down, calendared. In the course of 14 days, I had 8 people I regularly stayed with once, like Jody. Then I slept on Simone's couch a little more than once a week, which is to say, 2 to 3 times in the 14-day cycle. This left 3 to 4 wildcard days where I slept in new places. Or, if all else failed, I crashed on a couch in the common room of the dorms. The wildcard nights were built around the weekend, when anything could happen. "Get your hand out of my face!" A girl I didn't recognize was screaming at my friend Quinn. It was Saturday night, and the two of them stared each other down in the middle of a busy house party. "You told my friend she was ugly," the girl went on. "I did not say she was ugly," replied Quinn calmly. He held his palm facing forward, directly between the girl's face and his own. "I think she is very attractive," Quinn went on. The girl had had enough of Quinn's palm in her face. She grabbed his forearm and tried to move it to the side, but Quinn was strong. His hand remained where he wanted it. "Fuck you, asshole," said the girl. She stepped to one side, but Quinn moved his palm so it remained between them. That's when the girl started slapping Quinn in the face and shoulders. "Hey, Quinn!" yelled Dennis from the corner of the room. "Shove your fist up that girl's ass!" The girl continued to swing until Quinn's well-worn Red Sox hat toppled off of his head and landed on the floor. Quinn didn't move to retrieve the hat. He kept his feet planted with his palm in front of the girl's face. Eventually, the girl tired of hitting him and stormed out of the party. Moments after the girl exited, she was replaced by a scrawny, extremely flamboyant boy. He had red hair and wore a red shirt, pink shorts, and flip-flops. The boy stood in front of Quinn for a time. Quinn's arms now rested at his sides. "You're a bitch," said the boy eventually, and then he spit in Quinn's face. Before Quinn had a chance to react, the boy ran out of the party and joined the girl on the street. "Holy shit!" screamed Dennis. He grabbed someone standing next to him and began shaking them. "Did you see that?" Quinn just stared at the wall. He didn't even wipe the spit from his face. He stared for what seemed like a long time, and then he came to some kind of decision. In one motion, he scooped his hat off the ground and went barreling out of the door into the street. Dennis followed closely behind. The party was great. The house was huge. It was 2 stories plus a basement. Some bands had played in the basement earlier, but all that was done now. Still, the house was full of people drinking, and they flowed out into the yard. Small groups of people did drugs in the rooms upstairs. It was a warm spring day in Boston, and everyone was happy. "You should have seen Quinn," shouted Dennis, stumbling back into the house. "He just annihilated that little pussy." I squirmed nervously, thinking about things I'd seen Quinn do in the past. "This was fucking crazy," said Dennis. "Quinn literally picked up an entire shopping cart and smashed it over that little kid's head. He fucking wrecked him." I walked from the living room into the kitchen to get away from my friends. The party was full of college kids I had never seen before, and they all had to be better than these people I already knew. Plus, more people, more social gatherings. But no matter where I walked, Dennis was always somewhere, being an asshole. As I introduced myself to this person and that person throughout the night, I'd always ask them if they lived in the house. "Now, this is Bill's house," said one person. "No, this is Darren's house," said another. Every person I asked gave me a different name, and I started to question if anyone actually knew who lived here. I was talking to a guy while leaning against a kitchen sink when Dennis tried to get me involved in something. He'd been all revved up ever since Quinn got in that altercation. He was looking for a fight himself. "What do you think, Fletcher?" yelled Dennis from across the room. "Can I fit my hand up this girl's ass?" Dennis only had about 3 things he liked to say, and one of them revolved around putting his hand inside of other people's bodies. I ignored this question, hoping that Dennis would go away. But, of course, he never did. "Hey, Fletcher!" yelled Dennis again, pointing at a woman with short brown hair who stood beside him. "Should I fist this girl?" Luckily, this crowd was not looking for a fight. They cowered from Dennis's insults just as I would. But there were plenty of other nights when I saw Dennis get what he wanted. "Hey, Dennis," I hollered, crossing the room. "Let's get out of here." "I'm not tired," said Dennis. "I'm not going to sleep until I fist someone." Hey, I said, lowering the volume of my voice. "I know about another party. It's not far from here. Let's go." Dennis thought about this for a moment, and then he slapped me on the back. "All these girls here are prudes," he said. Outside, the streets were busy. We were in Allston, a neighborhood of Boston dominated by college kids. Every few blocks, we came to a house overflowing with drunk people. "This is it," I said, standing in front of some random house. Loud music shook the windows. I entered the front door before Dennis had a chance to question me and began skirting my way through a dense crowd of people. There was a heavy frat boy vibe, and I worried that my long hair would get me into trouble. I passed through a living room, and then a kitchen, and then found a rear door also overflowing with people. I stumbled out this door, leapt over a fence into a neighbor's yard, and quickly made my way back to the first party. Dennis could fight those frat boys. I was back in the kitchen talking to some violin major from Berkeley when Dennis came walking through the door. But this time it was worse. He was with Mac Mayhew. "Who's gonna get fisted?" yelled Dennis at no one in particular. Where Dennis couldn't find a fight, I knew Mac would succeed. I'd once seen Mac Mayhew knock someone out for simply tapping him on the shoulder. From where I stood in the kitchen, the door to the basement was right in front of me. I made a spontaneous decision to hide down there until the night was over. "Did you see the set?" asked a short blonde boy in the basement. He pointed at some guitars and amps that sat along one wall. "Yeah," I said, although I hadn't. There were a number of people milling around, boys and girls who were social enough to come out to a party, but not confident enough to immerse themselves in the more crowded rooms. "The bassist in the last band was so good," said the blonde boy. I nodded, but suddenly began to worry that this was the bassist of the last band, playing some kind of trick on me. 2 mattresses had been carried down into the basement and placed along the walls where 2 small windows existed. This was meant to lessen the volume of the band to the outside world, reduce the chances of noise complaints. I gave one of the mattresses a shove and it flopped down on the dirty floor. I sat down on the mattress, and moments later, the blonde boy joined me. "Do you play any instruments?" he asked. "No," I said, although I did. "I play bass," said the boy. I eyed him suspiciously. "Do you want a beer?" he asked. The boy pointed at one of the basement's dark corners. "We have a 30-pack over there." There was a girl hovering by herself in the middle of the room. She dressed like a 60s librarian, complete with the horn-rimmed glasses and all. I guess she was with the blonde boy because she retrieved a can of beer from the corner and presented it to me. I took the can and looked around the basement. Puddles of mud had formed where spilt beer landed on the floor during the show. A collection of children's lunchboxes from the 80s was piled around an enormous hot water heater. A thick layer of filth prevented me from seeing what the lunchboxes advertised. The mattress below me had no sheets, but it seemed new and the top was fairly clean. I bet I could sleep down here, I thought to myself. Around 3:30 a.m., I emerged from the basement. The party had mostly cleared out. Dennis was nowhere to be seen. If he found his fight, I never heard about it. There were 2 couches arranged in an L shape in the living room. They faced a small television on the opposite wall. I sat on one of these couches for a time, watching the last of the partygoers make their way home. Drunk boys desperately talked to the only girl in the room. People snuck upstairs to finish bags of cocaine. Eventually, I fell asleep. "Now this is a classic," I heard someone say. My eyes were closed. I wasn't exactly sure where I was. The song Fantastic Voyage by Coolio was playing. "But how does he fit all those people in the car?" asked someone sitting right beside me. "It's a magic car," said the first person. "A dude with a cane literally conjured it out of a bicycle." I opened my eyes and found 5 boys watching TV, 4 of them along one couch and 1 on the couch with me. When I sat up, they began clapping. "Couch guy!" they shouted, clapping louder and louder. As the clapping subsided, the boy on my couch thrust a beer in my direction. "Beer?" he asked me. The Coolio video ended, and as the next video began, one of the boys became very animated. "Do you know what song this is?" he shouted. "Well, it's going to tell me in like 2 seconds, said the boy on my couch. It was Sunday morning, and MTV was playing classic music videos instead of their usual reality television. I sat on the couch for an hour, drinking beer and listening to these 5 friends make fun of music video after music video. They were all from Texas, transplanted up north to attend Boston University, and they really knew how to make me laugh. "Burrito time?" said one of the Texans after a video had ended. The boy on my couch turned to me and asked, "Couch guy, you coming to get burritos with us?" Everyone stared at me silently. I thought another music video would begin, but MTV went to commercial. I looked at the TV for a moment, and then slowly nodded my head. Everyone began clapping again. "I'll round 'em up," said one of the boys, jumping to his feet. We watched a few more music videos, and then this boy returned with 5 additional roommates. "Who's this?" asked a man with long hair. "We found him on the couch," said the boy next to me. "He's a couch guy." I guess this was an acceptable answer, because the boy with long hair introduced himself as Blair, and soon everyone was introducing themselves to me. Of course, there was Bill and Darren and every other name I'd heard the night before. "We all get burritos every Sunday," said Bill. "It's our tradition." And then we were on our way. After the burritos, I bid these 10 roommates farewell. I rode my bicycle down to Newberry Street and sat on the slab with the bike messengers. The spring weather had cooled from the night before, but it still felt pleasant with your face in the sun. Eventually, we made our way to Other Side Cafe. They had recently received their liquor license. With a couple pitchers of beer, afternoon quickly turned to night. "What are you up to?" I asked. I was standing at a payphone on Mass Ave. "Nothing," said Simone. "Come on over." My backpack overflowed with dirty laundry. I'd been carrying it around all weekend. Before I had a chance to hang up the phone, Simone asked me, "Did you see Dennis last night? He was a total wreck when he came home." "I saw him for a bit," I said. "Well, he's being a hungover baby today." Simone's apartment was halfway down Newberry Street, a 10-minute walk from Other Side Cafe. I unlocked my bicycle and began pedaling, but soon found myself heading the wrong direction on Commonwealth Ave. I biked for a while, passing Boston University and the coffee shop where I worked. When Commonwealth Ave turned left, I detoured onto Brighton Avenue, and before I knew it, I took a right on Chester Street. Suddenly, I found myself in front of the house full of Texans. "Anthony Kiedis was never cooler than Flea," said someone from inside. "Flea was in the movie Suburbia. Plus his name is Flea." I stood at the front door. My bicycle was locked to a signpost on the street. "But John Frusciante is cooler than Flea," said someone else. "That's why they kicked him out of the band." I listened for a moment, and when no one said anything, I knocked on the door. "Come in." I entered the living room to find most of the roommates lining the 2 couches, drinking beer. "Couch guy," they said. "What's up?" "What are you guys doing?" I asked. Bill raised an unopened beer and held it in my direction. "What do you think we're doing?" he said. "We're watching music videos." Although the couches were mostly full, everyone scooted down and made room for me on the end. As I leaned back on the well-worn cushions, a beautiful song came on the TV, and everyone watched in silence, absorbed in its melody. When the song ended, Bill made a joke and we all laughed. And that's how the Texas house became part of my bi-weekly rotation. "You are blatantly lying to me right now," said Quinn. "You are blatantly lying to my face if you are telling me that contemporary pop stars have any value to society." I was in a cab with Quinn and Scandalous Eric. We had just left a house party in Alston where these two had been arguing about this topic for almost 2 hours. Scandalous Eric leaned forward in his seat and said, "But you admit that the Beatles have value to society." The cab skirted the edge of the fens on our way to Quinn's apartment in Dorchester. Quinn was in the passenger seat, and Eric was seated behind the driver. Both boys were talking at an uncomfortably loud volume. The cabbie was visibly unhappy. "Yeah, but the Beatles are not Christina Aguilera," said Quinn, staring forward, refusing to look at Eric. The cab slowed down and then stopped at a red light. It was winter and the fens was empty. Snow covered the banks beside the river. Scandalous Eric leaned across the length of the cab so his face was beside Quinn's ear, and then he shouted, "The Beatles are just the Christina Aguilera of their time!" Quinn never looked back. He simply opened the door to the cab, heaved himself from his seat, and began walking away. When the light turned green, the cabbie continued driving without hesitation. "What an idiot," said Eric, looking across the park. "Do you have keys to Quinn's apartment?" I asked. "Smelly Tom is home," said Eric. "He'll let us in." But Smelly Tom was not home. Scandalous Eric was my closest friend. We hung out most days. Boston is a small city, so we often chose to walk places instead of taking the subway. We'd walk 2 hours to a destination, the whole time discussing why things happen. Then we'd walk 2 hours home, now discussing why things didn't happen. We wanted to know how the world worked. Eric was opinionated, enough so that many of my friends asked me to stop bringing him around. "You don't hate everything about slavery," Eric told my brother one day. Yes I do," said my brother. "Do you hate the Great Pyramid of Giza? Do you hate the Colosseum in Rome? Do you hate the United States of America? If you don't hate those things, then you don't hate everything about slavery." My brother looked at Scandalous Eric with a frightened expression on his face. Eric would argue with anyone, anywhere, endlessly, if they'd give him the time. Everyone but me, because we basically agreed about everything. "You need to have at least 3 beverages with lunch," said Eric. We made our way through the Tufts University cafeteria, where Eric grabbed an apple juice, a Gatorade, and a can of Coke from a refrigerator. "At least 3 beverages," I agreed, picking up a tea, an orange juice, and a root beer. As we sat down, surrounded by drinks, I looked over my shoulder to see if the school security guards were eyeing us. All the food here was free if you snuck in through the back door. If Eric and I argued the least, Quinn and Eric argued the most. The two of them had grown up together, and maybe something about the way they were raised inclined them to stubbornness. In any case, I'd once witnessed Eric and Quinn in an argument so endless that I couldn't take it any longer. Eventually, I exited the room and went to sleep, but there was no escape, because when I woke 8 hours later, they were still at it, arguing in the exact same place that I left them. "Quinn's behaving like a psycho," said Eric as we stepped out of the cab. "It's disgusting. I've never seen him do anything like that. Running right out of a car?" Quinn lived on the 3rd floor. The staircase to his apartment ran up the exterior of the building, climbing from one porch to another. We stepped over a snowbank and then ascended these stairs. When we got to Quinn's door, Eric knocked aggressively for quite some time, but no one answered. He knocked and knocked while the cold wind blew on our backs. It would seem logical that, with Scandalous Eric being my closest friend, I would stay with him regularly during these couchsurfing years. But there was one problem. During this time, Scandalous Eric was couchsurfing as well. "Okay," said Eric. "There's a back door. Follow me." We circled the apartment building, trudging through the snow, and soon came to an enclosed stairwell in the rear. "We could sleep in here," I said as we climbed these stairs. "At least there's no wind." Eric turned and looked at me from a few steps above. "I'm not doing that," he said. Obviously, I did stay with Eric from time to time, which is to say, I crashed wherever he was crashing, like this night at Quinn's. For instance, a couple times a month, Eric and I shared a futon in our friend John Anderson's living room. We slept under the same blanket with the TV playing movies throughout the night. Technically, Eric and I had been banned from John's apartment by his roommate Tony, but Eric was more physically intimidating than Tony, so we kept coming back, and there was nothing Tony could do about it. Eric was the same height as me, on the shorter side of average, but he regularly worked out and his strength was visible. He was half Puerto Rican, with a smooth, boyish face, thick black hair, and tattoos lining his arms, legs, and torso. Eric was handsome, and he knew it, which was a quality that I envied greatly. "It's locked," said Eric. We stood in the rear stairwell, looking at another closed door. There was only one apartment per floor in this building. Quinn's kitchen sat just on the other side of this passage. Eric shook the door's handle violently and then began to steadily pound on the door for over a minute. "We can take the door off the wall," I said. Eric stopped punching the door and asked how. "They put the door on backwards," I said, pointing at the door's edge. "Doors, they're always supposed to open into the house, so the hinges aren't exposed. See these things right here?" I pointed at the 3 hinges on which the door pivoted. "These each have a pin in them, and if you pull the pin out, we can remove the door. We just need a hammer and a chisel, or maybe a screwdriver if it's thin enough. We passed a basement at the bottom of these stairs." Soon Eric and I were bumbling around in the dark basement. "Is there a light?" I asked, but Eric did not respond. "Here's a ladder," he said. We walked the ladder out into the snow and leaned it against the wall, but it barely reached the second-story windows, far from our third-story destination. Back in the basement, I ran my hands along the top of a table, hoping to touch something that resembled a hammer. Eric had his flip phone out, pacing around in its dim glow. "Here's a paint scraper," Eric said. "Oh, here's a sledgehammer." Back in the stairwell, I rested the blade of the paint scraper below the head of the pin, catching its edge coming up from the bottom. I tapped the scraper as lightly as I could with the sledgehammer, and after some adjustments, the pin began to rise from the hinge. Soon, scandalous Eric and I were prying the door off the wall. "Should we put it over here?" I asked as we held the door awkwardly between us. The dark stairwell suddenly seemed more cramped than before. "I got it," said Eric. He ripped the door from my hands, ushered it through the door frame, and leaned it against a refrigerator on the other side. "You have to be stupid to put your door on backwards," Eric said. Eric walked into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and then shut the bathroom door behind him. Unfortunately, I really had to urinate. I drank the better part of a 6-pack at the party. I sat in the kitchen for almost 20 minutes, waiting for Eric to come out of the bathroom, but the shower kept running. Eventually, I walked back down the rear stairwell and urinated in the snow. "Quinn is losing his mind," said Eric. He stood in the kitchen, opening a box of macaroni and cheese while water boiled on the stove. "Well, I've definitely seen him act impulsively before," I said. Eric laughed. "This is not impulsive. He's acting like a moron on purpose." Eric had exited the bathroom with only a towel around his waist, and he prepared his dinner the same way. Cold air filtered in through the wide-open rear door. I sat at the kitchen table, wearing my winter coat. "Should we put the door back on the hinges?" I asked. "Okay," said Eric. "For instance, the other day, Quinn came with me to Rick's place to pick up a half ounce of Coke. Eric didn't do drugs, but he sold them from time to time. We took the train there, and we're taking the train back, but Quinn refuses to pay. He insists on sneaking on like a moron. He's trying to get me arrested. Well, it's super easy to sneak on, I said. Yes, I know it's easy, said Eric. That's not the point. It's also easy to just pay $1 to get on the train. I bought him a token, but he refused to use it. He said it went against his principles. What principles? I asked. There's no fucking principle, said Eric. The principle is that it's really easy to sneak on the train, but there's no point in doing that when I have a half ounce of cocaine on me. He's losing his fucking mind. Eric took about 8 different spices out of the cabinet and began adding them to the boiling water. I don't know if I can keep living with him, Eric said. But, of course, Eric didn't live with Quinn. He just slept here regularly when he had nowhere else to go. Quinn's bedroom was a cramped mess. There were piles of books in one corner and stacks of pornos in another. A small TV sat on a dresser that overflowed with DVDs. Eric's clothing was scattered everywhere. I'd seen Eric dressed to go out before, and it was chaotic. Many outfit changes. The room had a couch against one wall and a bed in the middle of the floor, but the room was so thin that these 2 pieces of furniture were pressed against each other. As a result, you could not actually sit on the couch because the bed rested where your legs would go. Instead, the couch was more like a crib that you entered by climbing over the armrest. You can sleep in my bed, said Eric, pointing at the couch. If Quinn's not coming home, I'm sleeping here. Eric kicked off his shoes and hopped atop the mattress. You sure he's not coming home? I asked. When Eric didn't respond, I redirected my question. Should we put the door back on the hinges? Well, said Eric, if Quinn wanted his door on the wall, he shouldn't have had it on backwards. Obviously, this made no sense. Quinn had no part in the construction of this building. But where other people foolishly argued with Eric, I knew how to leave well enough alone. Eric put on a movie, and soon we fell asleep, drenched in the TV light. I woke to crashing and banging, things being tossed around the room. Stomp, 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 stomp. Either a winter coat or a small blanket suddenly landed on top of my body. I didn't open my eyes to see which one. Quinn was muttering under his breath, curses mixed with questions. He pulled back a thick curtain, letting in the morning light, gray with winter's misery. The DVD player was stuck on the title menu, repeating a song that had probably played 200 times while we slept. Eric, said Quinn, speaking at an audible volume for the first time. But Eric didn't respond, wisely playing possum. There was more stomping, a lot more stomping. For such a small room, Quinn really had places to go. Eventually, a dresser drawer was opened, and then Quinn stomped across the hall into the bathroom. The shower began to hiss. Jesus fucking Christ, said Eric. I lay there for a time, waiting for Quinn to return. But before he did, I fell back asleep. When I woke again, the apartment was silent. No shower, no stomping, no song from the TV. I didn't own a watch or a cell phone, so the time was anyone's guess. I had fallen asleep in my jeans and winter coat. Only my shoes had been removed. I climbed off the couch and found one sneaker amongst the scattered books in the corner and the other one out in the hall. I gathered both and tied them to my feet. Eric lay sleeping in the bed with Quinn at his side. 2 childhood friends under one blanket, probably arguing in their dreams. I grabbed my backpack from the kitchen, retrieved my toothbrush, and brushed my teeth. I removed a bottle of contact lens solution from Quinn's medicine cabinet and used it to insert my contact lenses. When I was done, I made sure to put the bottle back in the cabinet with the label facing the exact direction it faced when I found it. I unlocked the deadbolt on Quinn's front door, but quickly realized I could not lock the door again from the outside. Instead, I re-entered the apartment, passed Quinn's bedroom one last time, and made my way down the back stairwell. The rear door still leaned against the refrigerator. It was Sunday, and I was off to my school library. I would use the morning to get ahead on some reading for Tuesday, and then take a nap in the library's cushioned chairs. Later that night, I'd probably sleep at Simone's place, but I didn't know. There was a concert I wanted to sneak into at the Middle East downstairs, and a potluck at the Food Not Bomb's house. Plus, I needed to find 2 more social events before the day was through. I'm back. Season 3 kickoff, baby. Back in Boston. Back on the map. Interestingly, if you go back to Season 1 of this podcast and you listen to the Love Will Carry Me Home episode, you can hear another perspective on the fight where Quinn smashed the guy with the shopping cart. It approaches the same incident from like a more analytical angle. Just saying, for the heads out there, for the true fans. Once again, this season, I'm asking for support from you listeners. It's me, guys. It's Fletcher. It's just me and you here. I don't have any ads. I don't have sponsors. I'm trying to figure out how to make a living as a writer in the modern world, in the digital world. Currently, all books and movies and music and TV shows are free. My wife is like the most computer literate person I know, and there is nothing that she can't find on the internet for free if she wants to. All art in the world is free unless you, as a listener, like the artist enough to choose to help them. That's probably how the world is going to be from now on, forever. So I'm giving you the show for free, and I'm hoping that you choose to support me, and I could really use it. All I'm asking for is $5 a year. Not even $5 a year. $5 a season. $5 for the 5 episodes that are coming out in the next couple of weeks. I spend months writing and producing each episode of this podcast. It's what I do with all of my free time. But it's just not sustainable if I do it for free. You've got Venmo on your phone right now. My Venmo is at Fletcher C. Johnson. It might ask you to confirm the last 4 digits of my phone number. You don't have to do that. Just say, no, I'm good. It's at Fletcher C. Johnson. I got this right. Of course, if you want to support with more than $5, that's way the fuck better, man. I mean, that would be really nice. But anything is good. Even if you can only send $1, that's great. Anything is better than no dollars. This year I do have another bonus. For people who support the pod with $20 or more, I will mail you one short story straight to your home. Not email. I'm talking a physical copy. Your own little Fletcher C. Johnson book with one short story. And it's a good one. You can Venmo me at Fletcher C. Johnson or PayPal FletcherCJohnson@gmail.com. If you give $20 or more, please include your email address in a private note with the payment so I can get in touch and figure out the best way to mail you this short story. The story is about one wild night in Asheville, North Carolina. The other thing you can do to help me out is tell someone about the podcast. If you know someone who likes fun stories about living your life like an idiot, tell them to check out this podcast. That's huge for me. Just text it to them. Or you can tell the whole world about it by posting about it on social media. Okay, we were just back in Boston. I know everything has probably changed since I moved away from Boston 20 years ago, but let me tell you about a couple of ways to sneak on the Boston subway at the turn of the century. It's like they didn't even want you to pay. Back then, you had an exact change bucket attached to where the person sat in the booth. But that exact change bucket, it didn't count your money or anything. Like, you could just drop 5 pennies in there, and as long as it made some noise, you were good to go. This quickly became unnecessary, though, for a skinny guy like me, because the turnstiles in Boston were really thin back then. If you pulled the bar back like 8 inches while entering, you could pull the bar back because that's the direction it spins when you exit. But if you pulled it back while entering to the perfect sweet spot and turned your body sideways, casually, you had to make it look casual, well, then you could just glide right through. So this is what I basically did for the entire time I lived there. The few times that I did get caught doing this, they just made me pay the fare. So the worst case scenario was they made you pay the amount that you would have paid if you didn't try to sneak on. It wasn't much of a deterrent. Okay, well, here's a couple more options for sneaking on the Boston subway that may or may not still work. On top of having the classic subway turnstile, you also had the unmanned entrances. These are more like the revolving doors in a hotel or whatever. It spins in a circle, and one person can go through at a time after you swipe your card. Well, in the Central Square outbound station, there was one of these that was not flush with the ceiling. There was a space on top big enough for a person to squeeze through. So we'd boost each other up. And I don't know, these fuckers are probably like 8 feet tall, but we'd boost each other up and crawl through this tight space and drop down on the other side. But if you were in Central Square going inbound, or there was one at Kendall going outbound as well, there was a secret trick set up for the employees of the MTA. And it only worked at a couple of these revolving turnstiles. What you could do, and someone has to check this out, see if it still works, but if you pulled the turnstile back 3 times in a row, quickly, as if 3 people had just exited, then you could push it forward, and it would allow one person to enter. It sounds crazy, but it worked 100% of the time, but only at a few specific locations. Anyway, those were our tricks for sneaking on. Also, outbound trains were free after they came above ground, but that wasn't really a trick. That's just a fact. Okay. Next week, I'm dropping a big one. Not 1 episode, but 3 episodes all at once. More than half of this whole season. I'm not going to spoil what they're about, but I will tell you that it is the next installment of the complete history series for this podcast, following in the footsteps of the complete history of fashion episode from season 2. So hold on to your tits, because it's a big, big history. You've been listening to Fletcher C. Johnson. I'm Fletcher C. Johnson. Thanks for listening.